Hello and welcome to the Car Care Nut channel. Welcome back to another part of the ultimate guide for your Toyota, Lexus, and Scion suspension and steering. In today's video, we're going to be talking about ball joints and control arms as both front and rear. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Give the video a thumbs up if you like it. Consider following the channel on Instagram and Facebook for a sneak peek for upcoming videos. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting with control arms. And if you own a Toyota, you're probably going to go through a few, especially these. These are your front lower control arms, and again, if you watched part 1 when we talked about the struts, if you have front McPherson struts, you're likely going to have this style control arm. Now there's slight differences in size and shape and the way the bushing is oriented, but let's talk about this briefly. Now the control arm, very simple. This bolt, these two ends, bolt to the subframe. And over here, bolts to the ball joint. Classic design from Toyota, and they're very smart for not changing it because it's really a very stout and dependable design. I don't like cars that have the ball joint mounted onto the control arm, because every time you're replacing a ball joint, now you got to replace the whole control arm, or you're heating it up and pressing it out and doing all this mess. While here, Toyota Land, 2 nuts and a bolt. Boom, it's gone, they're separated. Very smart design. There are a few oddball designs here and there that actually doesn't have that with Toyota, but that's how it is. Now, most of your cars, SUVs, will have this design. Some of the trucks, actually most of the trucks, and some of the sports cars, you know, we get into the Supras and the BMW and Subaru. Now, some of your trucks will have a different style control arm. One at the bottom, one at the top, 2 ball joint design. It's just the way they're designed. This, ladies and gentlemen, is very expensive to fix and replace and do anything with. Now, this is for the front control arms. This is actually a trailing arm, technically. But let's talk about the rear control arms. Now, most of your Toyotas will have 2 style rear suspension. You're either going to have the solid beam. This is really bulletproof. It's like one giant control arm, if you would. Rarely goes out. Easily bent in accidents, by the way. But very simple otherwise. You just have a couple bushings. Nothing about it. Very simple. You'll never really have to do anything with it unless you're in an accident. Now the other style, and Toyota's going more into this style now, they have double wishbone style. This is the very newest stuff. And somewhere in between, Avalon, Highlander, Camry, some of the models will have similar suspension to the front. They will have 2 long control arms. This design has been on for a very long time. Solid, really has no issues. We're going to get into a few issues in a little bit, but these are the basic designs. The trucks will have their own designs. They have a solid rear axle, so nothing special in the back either. But let's talk about the main thing here. I'm going to leave this to the side. This is a real trailing arm, which is, by the way, a common problem on Highlanders, to make noise from this, early Highlanders. Watch my buying guide for that on this issue. But let's talk about control arms. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very expensive. Anything to do with control arms gets very expensive. So it's essential that you have the information I'm about to give you now, because I see so many people get taken advantage of with control arms. Because you hear the word control arms, that sounds serious. That's even more serious than spark plugs. Yes, you're right. But is it? Let's dig into this a little deeper. Now, as you can see, this is a control arm. It's just a giant slob of metal. Not much really can go wrong with this. The only thing that goes wrong with the control arm are the bushings. In my professional career, all my time with Toyota, I've never seen this bushing goes out, the bottom one. They never go out. I've never seen one go out. If you've seen one go out, please share it, because that would be the first for me. The one that always goes out is this one. There's a bushing, rubber bushing right here. It always goes out. Now, goes out is a relative term here. This bushing is glued on here. It's molded into this. Bolt goes through it, holds it to the subframe, and here's your control arm. The thing about it is, when this completely separates, when this rubber part right here is gone, you basically have this control arm just moving left and right, up and down, and this is connected to the bottom of your wheel, so now your wheel is moving left, right, up, down, and it's just all over the place. That's why it's called control arm, to control the movement of the wheel. Remember at the top, in the McPherson strut design, it is connected to the body, so likely it's not going anywhere until the strut line breaks, but we already talked about that. This bushing, if it only has little cracks in it, I'm not worried about it. If it's starting to actually separate, as you can see in this picture, I'm worried about it, but I'm not worried about replacing it yet. Because believe it or not, when it starts to separate like that, it could take 5 years, 10 years for it to completely separate. So when you get recommended control arms, again, the first question you ask, why and show me? Because if you have a control arm, and I see this all the time, these are grounds for a write-up in the dealership where I work. If you have a control arm that has tiny little cracks, guess what? It's a rubber bushing. It's going to crack over time. That's just normal. If that's what's going on with your control arm, you don't need to replace it. I've seen Toyotas go 10, 20, 25 years, 30 years on the same cracked control arm, just cracking rubber a little bit. Nothing happened. Sure, yeah, you replace it, life is good, but guess what's going to happen to the new one in, say, 10 years? It's going to crack exactly the same. So why are we replacing it? Please don't waste your money on this. This is very expensive because these things, you either drop the whole subframe down to replace them, or now you're jacking the engine and train. It's expensive, the bottom line. Even as a DIY, it's not exactly a walk in the park. Some models are easier, but most of them not exactly a walk in the park. If the bushing is completely separated, you don't need a mechanic to tell you that. You're gonna know, because that car will drive all over the place. Every time you hit the brakes hard, the whole steering will just jump to one side, because what's gonna happen is, as you hit the brakes, this whole control arm will go cling to one side, and when you let it go, it goes back. You're gonna feel that, trust me. I've seen them go bad, and it's not a happy day. You'll know immediately that something is horribly wrong. Again, if it's only little cracks, no. If it's starting to separate, like I showed you in the picture, and I'll show you again one more time, keep an eye on it. Say, let's wait till take a picture of it. Then tell them, no, I'll wait. Next oil change, go look at it again. Does it look exactly the same? If it does, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Let it go. Keep getting, until this thing starts having significant movement where you can actually see a giant cut or break in the middle of the bushing. We're not going to waste our money here, because it could be years and years until that happens. And you would have, at that point, you might just say, you know what? This car is 15 years old. It has 250,000 miles. I'm not going to spend thousands to replace control arms. It's time to get another one. Now, let's talk about parts. Where do you buy this? Now, yes, you can buy aftermarket, perfectly fine. But shop around, because the arms themselves are not very expensive from Toyota. Yeah, they are compared to some cheapo aftermarket, but quality aftermarkets, they're going to be pretty close in price. And you know what? If you need to ask yourself this: This is the original control arm in my car that I am replacing. My car is 15 years old. This part is 15 years old. Am I gonna want to keep this car another 15? If the answer is yes, get the quality part that you know with your own experience that has lasted 15 years. If you're only gonna keep the car for a year or two, just get the cheapest one you can find, always. It's just a bushing. Yeah, sure, the cheap one will wear out much faster, but as far as the rest, it's just a piece of metal. There's nothing to it. If it fits, it ships, and we're done. Keep it simple as that. Now for the rear control arms, or if you have the old style McPherson in the back, they're long control arms with bushings. The thing about those is, unless your car is 10, 15, 20 years old, you're really not going to have problems. And the main thing, the way you know these are bad, if you have that style, say you have a Camry 2005, 2006, or older or newer, Camry changed that design in 2018. You're driving on the highway, you take not a sharp turn, but like the highway is turning, you turn to one side or you turn to the other, all of a sudden you hear like a giant thumping noise from the back. That's usually the first signs that these bushings are starting to let go. These bushings, you can move the tire side to side and you actually feel them clunk, clunk, clunk. When these go bad, they can be kind of a nightmare if you live in the Rust Belt, because the bolts that hold them are always rotten and you have to cut everything and it just turns into a giant nightmare. But believe it or not, the last real control arm that I have replaced on a Toyota was probably a 2001 Camry, maybe 2005, 6 Highlander. That's really as far as it goes. But 2012 Camry, never. They're just solid. You won't have rear control arm failure this early. Front control arms, yes, a little bit. Certain cars, Siennas are notorious for them. Some of the older Corollas now are starting, but again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it has a little crack, don't worry about it. If it's starting to separate, keep an eye on it. Just see how far it progresses before we start dumping money on stuff we don't need. All right, now let's talk about ball joints. And I gotta admit, I haven't seen a new ball joint in a long time, and we're gonna talk about that. So, ball joints. I have news for you. If you own a Toyota, minus the trucks, we're gonna talk about that in a second. If you own SUV, sedan, hatchback, minivan, all the Toyotas basically, except the trucks. If a mechanic tells you you need a ball joint, we have a problem. Two things. Number one, Toyota makes, and I'm willing to stand by this, and I know we're on the internet, but I'm going to stand by this, makes the best ball joint ever. The end of that story. I am not debating this. This is the best made ball joint there ever will be. Second, the only ball joints I've replaced were either A, aftermarket, B, they are twisted upside down from an accident. The end. I don't think I've ever replaced a ball joint because it was actually loose and worn. Maybe a 1985 something, but I was not even born then. So there you go. If a mechanic comes to you, tells you need a ball joint, you will immediately say no, but then just before you walk away, you ask them why. Because I have seen Toyotas go 4, 5, 6, 7, 800,000 miles on the original ball joints. That's just how good they are. They're awesome people. If you find yourself in a situation where you must replace a ball joint, accident, whatever the case may be, or you just don't like how the old one looks rusty and you want a new one, you just feel better replacing them, please buy the original. They're actually not even expensive. That's the best part. You go buy an aftermarket one, and now you have a bad one, flat out from the box. It's tick-tock, just like everybody else. Now you're replacing a ball joint every 2-3 years, every 5 years. Oh, they're worn. Yep, replace it. You put the original and you never hear about it again. As simple as that. Do not replace Toyota ball joints. I don't care what your mechanic says. If it hasn't been an accident, you're not replacing it. The end. Case closed. Moving on. Have a nice day. I'll tell you some things that the mechanic will scare you. Seems like every time I see customers, when you bring the word ball joint, their eyes light up. They just remember that 50s car with the ball joint coming off and the whole wheel falling and the whole giant accident. You bought a Toyota, Lexus, or Scion. You did not buy a generic made disposable car. This is a prime example right here. You will have a mechanic tell you, oh, your ball joint is leaking. Oh, I'm sorry, is it the ball joint pump that's leaking? What is leaking? There's nothing to leak. There's a little bit of grease inside here. 15 years later, this little ring here that keeps this boot, to keep the grease inside, it has a tiny little tear and some of that grease comes out and you see a little bit of wetness around it. Oh, your ball joint's leaking. Life is about to end. You must replace the ball joint. And you know what your answer should be to that? I must find a new mechanic because he's lying flat out to you. Please don't do that. Don't replace these. And if you do, for whatever reason, put the original. You will not be sorry, and they're worth every penny, and they're not even expensive to begin with. I see this all the time. We had a guy this close to getting fired, came from another dealership. Oh, your ball joint is leaking. Leaking what? It's not leaking. There's nothing wrong with it. We're not doing that. We don't do that. That's wrong. That's flat robbery to the customer. Another thing is, oh, they're 10 years old. They have play. Show me. I've never seen a Toyota ball joint wear out like that. If I'm wrong, great. Show me. If this thing, so basically ball joint, this, which I will never be able to move because it's a brand new one. There we go. You see this? This moves. So there's a bar and a ball inside of here that sits in a joint, ball joint. Now, when this is loose, you can hold this and pick it up and down and you'll feel movement. Not side to side. Side to side is normal, but up and down. That's when a ball joint is worn. And if you've owned any other car other than Toyota Lexus Scion, you've probably heard about this guy. Oh, the ball joints are loose. Yep, you move the wheel. Some of them you have to load the suspension. Toyota's included to check if they're worn. Unless a mechanic shows you that, you're gonna slap him with the new aftermarket ball joint and you're gonna walk away. Please don't do that to yourself. It's not worth it. You're wasting your money flat out. You're just pouring money in the garbage. And if you're putting an aftermarket one, I implore you to buy an original one. You're not gonna be sorry, I promise you. One thing I will say about ball joints. If you own a truck, let's talk about 4Runner, Sequoia, Tacoma, Land Cruiser, Tundra. Now these also have actually two ball joints in the front, two on each side. We have seen some of them go bad and some of them as bad as rip out completely, but we're still talking about a 10, 15-year-old truck. Now, most mechanics don't check these control arms, right? You have to load the suspension and check it. Maybe we'll make a video about that one day when I get a Tundra to work on. Now, these ball joints do go out, but the best part is, if you own one of these trucks that's early enough, there was actually a recall. Toyota messed up, they recalled it because this is a safety concern. Otherwise, again, if you're going to replace a ball joint on one of these trucks, you need to get an original one. It's not expensive. It's not worth it. If you need to look at your truck again. Is this a 10-year-old truck? Yes. This is a 10-year-old ball joint. You buy an aftermarket one, now your 10-year ball joint becomes a year, 2, 3 maybe on a good side. Invest in quality parts. You're going to get quality results. It's as simple as that with this stuff. If you own a 10-year-old truck, the ball joints need to be checked, because they're not going to just go from good to wheel flying off to the side of the car. No. If they're checked regularly, you're going to eventually catch it when it just starts having a little bit of movement. Replace the ball joints with quality ball joints, which quality ball joints in this case, original ball joints. I'm sorry, if there's a good aftermarket out there, great, but you're not the same as original in this case. Replace the ball joints, move on. Life is good. It's as simple as that. Well, I hope this video was helpful and informative for you. We're going to wrap it right here for this part. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you wouldn't miss out upcoming parts. Leave a thumbs up if you like this video. Follow the channel on Instagram and Facebook. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And we're going to see you in the next part. Have a wonderful day.